תודה רבה לנווה, לגרשון, לדן, דברים
Thank you, Gershon, Dan, and I would like to begin with the first session. We are looking forward to hearing the speakers, and we are delighted to call them to the stage. Our first session will be moderated by someone you just heard speak, Dan Diker, President of the JCPA. I would like to remind you that aside from these booklets, we also, Bitonistim and the JCPA, have provided for you, aside from the conference, content that is unique and was produced especially for this conference and written especially for this conference, and we'd be delighted if you would read it. And a lot of the conclusions you will hear today are in there. We have the JCPA booklet right here on the table, and at the Bitonistim, maybe we're something more innovative, a different genre, but the same QR code that you see here and by the reception. There are two publications never before issued, one on the Oslo Accords and one on the social media positive position, how the Fatah-Hamas differences are shown on social media. And I would like to ask to the stage Dan Diker, who will moderate a panel. The panelists will be Dr. Yuval Steins, Dr. Yair Hirschfeld, Dr. Einat Wilf, and Brigadier General in Reserves Effi Eitam. יש לנו פה
whom really need no introduction, even though we'll introduce them anyway, because it's fun to read their bios. Harvard, Einat Wilf, where were you at Harvard? Which house were you in? 96, ages ago. First of all, allow me to introduce Professor Yair Hirschfeld, who was, as I think all of us know, is one of the architects of the Oslo process and the Oslo structure. Professor Hirschfeld has been a lecturer at University of Haifa, involved in promoting Israeli-Palestinian peace process for over 40 years. During the 1980s, he organized a confidential dialogue between former Prime Minister Shimon Peres and the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank and Gaza. In 1990, founded together with Dr. Yossi Beilin, the Economic Cooperation Foundation. Professor Hirschfeld prepared a study which became the conceptual model for Oslo itself. He led the non-official Israeli team at Norway, became then member of the official negotiating team, leading to the conclusion of the Israel-PLO Declaration of Principles in September 1993. And Professor Hirschfeld, it's a great honor to have you with us and to share with us your thinking, which I know you've been doing.
Maybe to start a dialogue.
You did,
If I listen to you, there's no word true that you say. And the fascinating thing is that the lady that spoke just now, she wouldn't come and ask me about Oslo. She knows everything without asking anyone. And it is what I call you, what is happening, and I'll say it in very, very, very vulgar terms. Both camps are engaged in intellectual masturbation. And there's no speaking to each other, and it's a disaster. And I'm happy we have the opportunity to speak to each other.
No, we're really very honored that you're here. This is a forum for respectful deliberation and debate, which I think is critically important. And full engagement, and having known you for many years and having hosted you at Jerusalem Center, we're very literally and absolutely sincerely very honored to have you here. Dr. Einat Wilf, who I've had since I was a reporter at the Knesset many years ago, I've had the pleasure, Dr. Wilf, of knowing you. Dr. Wilf was a member of Knesset, Labor Party, as well as the Independence faction, 2010 to 2013. She's a graduate of Harvard University. A master's award, and then a doctor of letters as well in international relations, if I'm not mistaken, political science. And she has been a senior advisor at McKinsey & Company and wrote 7 books. I think the most acclaimed book is the one that you wrote with Adi Schwartz, which is called The War and Return, which, if I'm not mistaken, is an international bestseller. It was certainly very, very well read in English on the international community regarding literally the war return of the PLO and what the policy implications of that are. She served in Unit Shmone Matayim, 8200 in the IDF, and was an esteemed member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee as well in the Knesset. And we're very delighted, really delighted, Dr. Wilf, to have you. Thank you for schlepping to Tel Aviv after taking your children to school. That was the most important. Now, Effi Eitam, the most important thing about Tataluf, Brigadier General Effi Eitam, is that he's a grandfather of 36 grandchildren. That's the most important thing, I think, of Effi Eitam. Lives in the Golan Heights, is well known for his heroic efforts in the IDF during the Yom Kippur War, and as I said, lives in the Golan, was a member of the Knesset between, he actually served in the IDF between 71 and 201, and then retired or went to reserve as a Brigadier General. He was in politics until 2009, a member of the Knesset, and he also Ukihen Kiyo Pa'il. He was a very active chairman of the board of the energy company and other private concerns, married to Elite, and father of 8 and grandfather of 37, I says, and lives in the Golan Heights. Effi, it's really a deep, great pleasure to have you, to hear your thinking, which you've been thinking about, I know, a lot for the last 34 years, essentially, or 32 years. Professor Hirschfeld, can we start with you? Please, I know you have whatever's comfortable for you. You can see here. Yeah, you can speak in whichever language. We're in simultaneous translation. I just thought it'd be easier to speak. Whatever is easier for you. You're more than welcome. You can speak from the panel. You can speak from here. I thought more of an informal discussion. We speak from here, and the idea is that perhaps each of our speakers will speak for about 10 minutes, and we'd like to have some discussion in the room as well. So, Professor Hirschfeld, you sent a list of about 5 or 6 or 7 remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for listening to me. I must say from the beginning, before the 7 marks, that if I heard how terrible the situation of Israel today is, this has changed. I believe that Israel is basically very strong. The problem is our internal discussion. And the internal discussion, I will ask some questions and hope for good answers. Now, let me go to the 7 remarks. The first remark is historical. Begin and the Likud signed the Camp David Accords in 1978 and committed 20 times to 242, committed to negotiations with the Palestinians and laid out a path that we had to go. And the Americans were assigned to it, and Egypt was part of it. Then when it came to the implementation, nothing worked. I worked since 1980 with Shimon Peres and Yossi Beilin, trying to get Palestinian support for the Jordanian option. In April 1987, he came with an agreement with King Hussein, and the Likud successfully destroyed it. Then Schulz came out and asked Mr. Shamir, is there any way you're willing to implement the agreement you signed, the Likud signed on? And Schulz's answer was no. At least Charlie Hill came home. And as a result, Mr. Schulz went to the PLO and started to speak to the PLO. So any argument of the right wing that we spoke to the PLO, this was only the doing of the right wing and not of the left, only for the basic information of it. Remark number 2. We went through 13 years of trial and error. And as a matter of fact, if you like it or not, with Moledet and Geulah, and I will have some questions to General Gershon Cohen, who I like personally very much, and I've had long discussions with his brother. The question is, have we somehow to live with the Palestinians? And have they some rights? Anyway, for 13 years, I developed I led negotiations. I helped Peres to lead negotiations with the pro-Jordanians. I worked with Yossi Beilin with the other leadership, with Naftali Blumenthal with the economic leadership, and we got an understanding of Palestinian thinking and action. And I built trust and I built networks, and the outcome of the trust was that we prepared in the end the formula for the Madrid conference, and negotiations started on the 3rd of November 1991. And after they started, the negotiations very quickly came into a deadlock. And then the Palestinians gave me something which normally is not done. They gave me the Palestinian negotiating positions on 15 or 20 issues we discussed, and they gave me the Israeli positions. And I looked at it and said, we have somehow to cut it through. And the way, the issues that were dealt with were very serious. And I found a way to deal in a way that was pro-Israeli, would take care of Israeli interests. I'll give you the 4 or 5 examples. Example number 1 is the most important one. We had to discuss who is the source of authority. The source of authority, the Palestinians wanted to say that the autonomy, the self-government authority will be the source of authority. They said no, Israel has to be the source of authority. The principle of gradualism made it clear that Israel is the source of authority. Has made it until today. The second issue was security. There was the question of external security, internal security. The principle of gradualism made it possible that the external security would be totally in Israeli hand, and internal security would be under Israeli control in cooperation with the Palestinians. There was the issue, of land and water. On land and water, I would have gone further than the agreement went. But on all these issues, the process, the idea of gradualism made it possible to move forward and reach an agreement. Now, at the same time, 91, 92, I was asked to prepare a study called Israel, the Palestinians in the Middle East, from Dependence to Interdependence. And some of the findings are very relevant today. And some of the findings show how some of the limitations we have. Finding number 1 was that after self-government, Camp David was a disaster. It was very clear that if we speak about want to go to permanent status, I believe Israel needs, from our own purpose, a 2-state solution. But if we go to permanent status, Israel has to give to the Palestinians and can't get anything. It cannot get anything because we sign an agreement with the Palestinians and around us there's hostility, it doesn't help us. So in the report I wrote, we have to go to the self-government agreement, and then we need to establish a Middle East security organization, and we need to make a Middle East community for water, energy, trade, and then I wrote tourism. Today I would write trade. We had a clear understanding that the Camp David concept was wrong, and we had to change it. I tried to do so. I spoke to the Americans. I had a British Sir Tom Phillips who helped me to promote that concept. It didn't work. The Americans were heavy, said you signed the agreement, you have to keep to it. I understood, don't want to go into details, but I understood that the process ahead of us, because of militant Islamic fundamentalism and because of Arab Nasserism, Arabism, there will be a long way ahead. It will be a long way ahead, and there will be terror, and there will be violence. There was terror before, and there was violence before. The question is, how do you go ahead and how you move forward? And there was a way of working together, not only with the Palestinians, but with the Jordanians everywhere. And also prepared to peace with Jordan and enormously strengthened Israel's security. Now, the 6 principles of Oslo. The six principles of Oslo are, from my point of view, true today. And if Prime Minister Netanyahu will go for a deal with the Abraham Accords, and the Abraham Accord, if the king died, the king lives, Oslo is dead, the Abraham Accords is alive, the 6 principles of Oslo are still true and they'll still be relevant. Number 1 is gradualism. You don't go everything ahead. Number 2 is Palestinian empowerment. The Palestinians have a right to live. The Palestinians have a right for their own economic development. The Palestinians need some kind of dignity. And if you deny it, you're undermining it. If you have an Israeli guy who says that I'm chukim bakbuk, obviously there will be an intifada. So number 2 was self-empowerment. Number 3 was control, reconciliation and cooperation. Number 4 was security. And number 5 was regional empowerment. And number 6 was optimal inclusion. All these 6 principles are true today. Let me go to the 4th remark. Now, when it came to negotiations, I did something which was maybe difficult, and Paris was angry with me. In March 1993, I concluded the concept for an agreement with the Palestinians, which actually helped to create it later, without having the authorization by Paris and definitely not by Rabin. And this obviously you may, but in that, in paragraph 7, spoke not of handing Gaza and Jericho to Arafat, but handing it to a trusteeship, handing it to an Egyptian-American trusteeship, which would have created thing. And by 1993, I had 13 years of experience with the Palestinians. I had all the stories about Arafat. I had an understanding who we're dealing with. And so I said, let's have a trusteeship and not hand it to him. Paris opposed it. Paris opposed it, I believe, for all the wrong reasons. I can tell you why. But the understanding that you need outside involvement in order to bring about partition of the state of Greater Israel is an important finding. Paris didn't want to recognize the PLO. And I must say I was a small screw in the entire thing, but I supported the idea. We signed on the 23rd of August 1993, we signed in Oslo an agreement between Israel and the Palestinian delegation to the Washington talks. But Yoel Singer came to Rabin and said, we need to speak to the PLO and we need to recognize the PLO. And then it was not, it's a long story why Paris didn't want it, and I supported him, but if you've got time, we can speak about it. I don't want to go to Now, negotiating is a very difficult task. I don't know how many of you have been involved in negotiations, but there are 2 basic ways of negotiation. There's one basic negotiation, say, I want to achieve this, and I'm going to get it this way or that way, which is very nice. Which is very nice. I think it is, you want the desirable, not the achievable. This is quite a problem. My understanding is you have to know who your partner is, and you have to go for it. I asked a friend of mine, Suhair Menasre, who was governor of Jenin, and a wonderful man, and real man of peace, asked him, give me Arafat's thinking. And he told me more in detail, but in Beg he said, Arafat needs, אפשר לא לצלצל בטלפון, סליחה אדוני, זה מפריע לי. I'm sorry, if you're not interested in what I'm saying, you could go out. Who's the, מה זה הדבר הזה? I was educated in a European place where basic behavior is part of an important. Who מי הדבר הזה? Anyway, you have to know who Arafat is. Now, Arafat's strategy was always to adopt two strategies. I call it Arafat the good, the bad, and the ugly. He could be good, and I can give you quite a lot of examples where he was good. Bad was to his own people, and he could be very ugly to us. And you know where I was ugly, you were all saying it. Now, the way you would have to do is you have to block the negative strategy and get him into the positive strategy. And we did it at the time. We did it not, I'm not speaking today, we did it 1996, 97, 98, 99. The first thing we did, with Palestinian friends, we prepared a speech of Arafat, which he gave in Stockholm in December 1998, moving from the logic of war to the logic of peace. any intelligent government, which didn't follow, any intelligent government would have taken the speech and said, let's work on a code of conduct on the basis of the logic of war to move from the logic of war to the logic of peace. And you have a code of conduct, you go to negotiations that you know what happens if the negotiations don't succeed. Number two, we had two negotiating teams with David Brodet on one side and Marel Kurd on the other, giving Palestinian economic empowerment. And he actually signed the EPS, Economic Permanent Status Agreement, which gave the Palestinians economic power and an economic position to develop substantial economic facilities, industry, agriculture, all kinds of other things. We then went with Gilad Sher. We prepared a security agreement. We put what we called the a trilateral Israeli-Palestinian permanent status security understanding, which locked the Palestinians into an Israeli and Jordan security concept. And number four, we went for a lot of people-to-people activities. These four activities pushed Arafat, if he would like it or not, and he would have gone for it, to a slow process. Now I have to tell you something else. When we moved to prepare permanent status, and I negotiated the Berlin-Abu Mazen agreement. When I negotiated the Berlin-Abu Mazen agreement, it's the biggest mistake I did in my life, and I'm sorry I did so. But so I agree with every word which it says there. But you have to understand that before we signed the agreement, Arafat called first Yossi Beilin, and afterwards he called me and said, don't go for it. Don't go for it. The gap is too wide. We can't reach it. Your leadership is not prepared for it. I'm not prepared for it. Don't create the utopia of an agreement that we don't have not. We have to go slowly and gradually. And I'll tell you, the worst, I think to give you a comparison, in December 1954, Abba Eban wrote a paper on peace, how wonderful peace will be. It's been the biggest damage for peace, because it created an utopia that you cannot have. And the Berlin-Abu Mazen created an utopia you cannot have. I can finish actually, well, now, if I finish. There are two more remarks. The major remark is that we have to see how do we include the religious communities? How do we with the religious communities on both sides? We in Oslo made the big mistake to exclude the religious communities. I agree. And I'll tell you much more. People wanted to kill me. I was threatened by murder since 1981. The left is under an ongoing incitement and hate from the right against us. In 1981, and this hasn't ended. In 1981, Peres and Beilin were almost pushed over by a car in Kiryat Shmone, and I told Yossi, if you don't take these people to court, they will never give up. And we have to take care of this unbelievable internal incitement. And we have to be aware that there is a Jewish Zionist ideology based on Tchernikovsky's Sarki, that we will fight for whatever it will cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yair. Dr. Wilf, we talked briefly the other day internationally about your sense of things, both on the positive side and the greater challenges. Share with us some of your thoughts about where we are today, where we've come.
רק שאלה, אם אני מדברת עברית, יש מי שלא ידע? לא? מצוין. Okay.
Okay, great. So I have two comments about numbers before we begin. It's in favor of the Arabs and the Muslims. We could say that they were very successful, and as long as we care about the state of the land of Israel, we are destined to live as a very small minority in a very large Muslim and Arab world. One of the numbers that I like to share is that in 1948, the ratio between Jews and Israel and Arabs was 1 to 50.
And what does Ben Gurion do? He really understands that we are a minority in the region. He calls for the Jewish, he calls for immigration, for aliyah, to encourage larger families. And today we have 10 times more Jews in Israel than there were in 1948. And the ratio between Jews and Arabs and Jews in the region now is 1:60. So obviously they've been doing their job as well. And in short, we will always be a very small minority, ethnic and national and religious and linguistic minority in a very large Arab and Muslim region. And it all begins with that. That's my first comment about numbers. Second note about numbers, the idea of a two-state solution was always a Zionist idea. It was never an Arab idea. And from one moment to the next, and there was never an Arab vision for there to be two states if one of those states is a Jewish one. And why was it a Zionist vision? Because in this case, unfortunately, an issue that is not emphasized enough is that Arab violence against Zionism in the 1920s and 1930s was successful, along with the British surrender. And the Jews who were supposed to be the majority in Israel were attacked and burned. And the fact that the British succumbed and closed the gates of Israel to the Jews is something that we experience until today. And with all of the immigration of Jews from the Arab countries, and we should thank them for that. And therefore, from that moment and on, the idea of the separation, of the division, the idea of the two-state solution, or drawing a border that does not go through the Jordan, that's not on the Jordan River, but rather between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, is a Zionist idea, and a Zionist idea exclusively because that is the only way, given the numbers, to guarantee the genuine redemption that will enable a sovereign nation for the Jewish people. And that is the meaning of redemption, enabling the Jewish people to be a sovereignty. And in order for that to happen, because of the British surrender and the fact that the gates were closed to Jewish immigration, there was a need for a separation plan, making it a Zionist one. This leads us to Oslo. There were two assumptions when it comes to Oslo. One is true and valid until today, and one that turned out to be mistaken, and we have to think about how we can cope with that. The correct approach was that, once again, the Zionist idea that in order to have, for the Jewish people to have an independent state, the land has to be divided, and that remains a necessity until today. I don't think there is a worse or more dangerous idea than those who want to mix the populations within the territories in a manner that prevents a border from being drawn. So that is a valid argument. It remains in place, and I think that a lot of the struggle is related to that border. And I call the ongoing, the current struggle, the latest struggle over the border. As you know, Israel was established without borders, and when people talk about the borders of 1967, Israel did not have borders in 1967 or before. There were ceasefire agreements and not borders, but since 1973, in fact, and in 1975 especially, Israel has been in a very long process of establishing agreed borders to one extent or another, whether in the peace agreement with Egypt, the leaving Gaza, the agreement with Lebanon, and the maritime agreement that sets the northern border to a certain extent, recognizing the Golan Heights that closes the northern border with Syria. There is the agreement with Jordan that regulates the border on the east. The Oslo Agreement started to address the issue of the West Bank, and now we are struggling over the final border, and that is the final border that we have to resolve. And it's not only a border, it is a border that is related to the core of the question of what a Jewish state is. What is redemption? Is it the land? Is it the Bible? Is it sovereignty? I am a member of the camp that believes that the value of secular Zionism is to put the idea of redemption in the context of sovereignty and not things like land or God. And I think that is why it has been so successful. And if there's any tragedy, in my opinion, it is that the religious Zionism took the achievements of secular Zionism and made it and could transform them into godly achievements as opposed to the achievements and the vision of people who wanted to redeem the land and their people. And this is an idea that remains valid. A border that guarantees a Zionist sovereign Jewish state, that was always the correct idea, which is why Oslo was so important. The mistake was to assume that the Palestinians are Zionist and that the Palestinians want what the Jews wanted as Zionists, that the Palestinians are people who wanted to be released from occupation, that they are a people who want a state, and therefore they will act like the Zionists and behave as a people that if the decision is made, and that is the greatness of Zionism, and especially secular Zionism, at a moment of decisiveness, of making a decision between fantasies about land and the opportunity for sovereignty, that Zionism always chose sovereignty, and this is related to our being a minority in an Arab world. We always chose a state even at the expense of a land, and that's why we were successful. And we assumed that the Palestinians wanted the same thing, and was our mistake. And it turns out that the Palestinians proved by their actions, by their decisions, that you can go into all of the details, but nothing is as important as the moment of decision, of making the decision. When the Palestinians had the option of having a state in part of the land, but the Jews will have a state in the other part of that land, meaning they would have to abandon the fantasy of returning, the fantasy of a state from the sea to the river. Whenever they faced that crossroads, they always chose to cling to their fantasy of the Jews not having a state of their own. And that is something that we have to cope with. We have to think about how it can be done and how we can set borders. If there are no options for Palestinian agreements, what are the roles of the Arab countries? I call myself an optimist for the long term. I think that the Arab countries, and Netanyahu was certainly correct about that, the Arab countries realized that the conflict was not about occupation or about settlements. It was a struggle against Zionism. The Arabs and the Arab countries are in the best position to tell the Palestinians the following sentence that was not said to them in Oslo or since then. The War of 48 is over. And given the fact that your goal in 48 was for the Jews not to have a state, you lost that war. And therefore, you have to move forward from there. And if you have a constructive vision of a state alongside the state of Israel, it will happen. But as long as your goal is to exist instead of the state of Israel, there will not be support for that idea. That is the struggle we have to face. How do we make around the square? Enabling a sovereign Jewish state with a border within the land, and the fact that the Palestinians persist with their vision of obtaining the entire land of Israel, that is the problem. Thank you very much, Einat. And now we will hear from Effi. Effi, you talked about the challenge of the structure of the Oslo Accord, which changed the structure of the state of Israel as you've known it over the last years.
I can speak in English,
בוקר טוב, אני יכול לדבר באנגלית, אבל ברמה העקרונית אני מעדיף לדבר
We are Israeli institutions, so I think it will be more appropriate that we should speak Hebrew. But if there is any problem with the translation, שומעים? So if there is any problem with the translation, I will try to fill the gaps in English, אבל אדבר את רוב דבריי בעברית. קודם כל צריך לומר ש...
I would like to start by saying that Rabin's assassination, which shook Israeli society from the political perspective, from the ethical perspective, the human and Jewish perspectives, I closed the discussion about Oslo because Oslo was the legacy, that was Rabin's main legacy, and therefore any discussion about its success or failure was directly related to who killed Rabin and who was responsible for killing peace along with Rabin's assassination. And I think that 30 years later, we can address this issue with the appropriate caution and pain and horrified feelings about this assassination. We can address this process and talk about it 30 years later. And I think that after 30 years of tears and blood, and considering the fact that the process is not going anywhere, it's not going to disappear, we really need the courage that has been demonstrated here to talk about it from many different perspectives, from critical perspectives, including asking the question of why it's still with us today. And I want to begin by stating that Oslo is not just between us and the Palestinians. It is an issue that the Palestinians played the game, followed the rules of the games. They had expectations. They participated in the process. But Oslo is an internal process that was done by the State of Israel amongst the Jews. That is where it began, and its DNA, including its failures, are ingrained in the place where it started within the Jewish nation. And I want to talk about two aspects, or actually one aspect that affects two areas in which I was involved as an adult, as a senior officer in the IDF and in politics later on. I want to talk about what I would call the DNA of the attempt to the subversiveness in which Oslo was born. And again, we're hearing that it's not personal. Who are you as a partner in Oslo? And I think that we have to talk about the subversiveness among us, not only in the context of what Oslo did, which made subversiveness a legitimate means of the establishment of Israel, but what this legacy does for other governments and how it affects their legitimacy and their ability to rule and their ability to advance the policies to which they are committed, which they promise their voters. And I want to talk a little bit about this. I'm not talking about conspiracies or something unusual. Subversiveness is the constant existence within reality. There are no structures that are, there's always some type of subversion, and a state is a group that runs with order. A state has an institution, has an army, it has a legal system. It's a very organized system, and organized systems of this kind will always have a goal. There will always be some type of subversive subversive interaction. And just an example from nature, the most subversive powers in nature that almost no structure can overcome are water and wind. Water and wind are soft forces. If you ever felt wind on your face, unless it involved ice and snow, you know that it's soft. And the same thing is true about water. If you feel a drip of water, you ask how much damage could a drop of water possibly do? But its power is misleading, and the subversive power of harm for order, for an well-organized organization is often underestimated. And Oslo was the result of subversiveness in the deepest meaning of the word, in the ideological perspective of the word. And I also want to say that we all know that Rabin knew what subversion was all about. He came from the world of Red Rosa, and when he wrote the service notes, he wrote that his main partner throughout his political career was very precise. He wasn't a philosopher, but he had very, very sharp instincts. And when he called Shimon Peres a tireless, subversive person, he talked about how he and the people that worked with him, what Rabin called his poodles, they are subversive people who aspire to dismantle the order of decisions and conventional actions that are taken by the national institutions. He feared that, he understood that if you heard him give his speech after he was elected, he said that I will guide and I will decide. He says that basically saying that I will do everything in my power to prevent these subversive ideas from being realized. And they did. They did happen. They were realized in the end. And I want to explain very briefly about the types of subversiveness and why one of the reasons that Oslo wasn't cancelled is because its subversive nature continues to remain in Israeli, as part of Israeli society. The first approach is dismantling, saying, dropping the ball, saying, I can't take it anymore, I can't do it anymore. Looking at reality, the person looks at reality and says he can no longer change reality and just throws up their hands, they give up. And that is the type of subversiveness that can destroy the structure from the highest levels. Another type of subversiveness that was applied to Rabin was defining his direction. You will remain in your role, but we will cause you to change your mindset and change the way you've been thinking your entire life. It might have happened to Sharon to a certain extent. And we might want to talk about how incrimination is also something that was used, and is still used as a way of undermining the legitimacy of functioning government institutions. Now, I want to explain why there was a need for subversiveness. Rabin, by nature, his record was a very organized person. He represented order, Palmach, IDF, the Six-Day War, all of the defense conventions, including moral nuances that if the tiniest question about his moral values, he quit. And a person who is so rigid, so clear, and he comes to his second term in office as prime minister, it was very clear that there would be a need for to change his course in order for Rabin to agree to bring Yasser Arafat, one of the leaders of the largest terrorist organization after the first Lebanese war, exiled him to Tunis, and Rabin advised Begin to tighten the fortification around Beirut in order to see Arafat board a ship and disappear into Tunis, and that same Rabin would say that would bring this person and this organization back into the perimeters, the existential perimeters of the state of Israel, Judea and Samaria, our internal borders. This is something that required some significant change, a reorganization of his perspective of reality. And the question in this regard is why it was so successful, but it certainly required, following what the Oslo people said, it required creating facts and conditions that would eventually enable changing the perception of Rabin in such a dramatic way. And the other partner paid a very heavy price for the results of Oslo, and that was the IDF. The IDF and the intelligence services, the strategic analysis. I won't talk about the Shabak and how it was recruited for this issue, but it had to undermine the army and the conventional thinking organizations, the methodological analysts. It had to hide the process from the army, and that is what was done.
And when these two establishments of order, Rabin, who for the IDF was a huge leader, very much appreciated as a commander, when he underwent this process and the IDF did not prepare to have a different paradigm in place, the road was paved for what is now known, and it's something we cannot believe. It's unbelievable how it even passed, and perhaps Hirschfeld will explain to us later how they managed with this process, but certainly it is a process that is subversive, that has had great outcomes, and because it was subversive, it is not committed to the day after, the morning after, because subversiveness by nature says we will destroy everything we know. What will happen tomorrow? Perhaps some utopia, equality, peace, defense of democracy, all sorts of utopias, the connections of which two actions on the ground is completely random. It's a manipulation designed to mobilize millions of idiots who will be used for this subversiveness. If anyone can identify similarities to what is happening now, does so at their own risk. If I were to sum up Oslo, in my view, Oslo has freed into our political, governmental, security world manipulations that are subversive and, to a certain extent, or to a great extent, I would say, out of not being committed. Would any mother or would the IDF ever come to Pundak or to Hirschfeld and complain to them? They did what they did, they disappeared, and now you have to live with the consequences. I want to say that within subversiveness, in the sense that does not accept a simple decision. Here, yes, you have to be simple, not simplistic, of democratic mechanisms where an elected government subversive is also a prime minister with 4 seats in parliament. Yes, that too. This kind of exhaustion of legitimacy within a democracy, to call a person prime minister when they have 4 seats in Knesset, when Hamas brings the majority in the coalition, to call that a democracy or the expression of the will of the nation, that's just like saying that refusing to serve is right. Okay, thank you, Effi. We don't have Yuval Steinitz, so I know that I am an existential threat by Morris Hirsch, who is going to hang me. But there's one thing we have not discussed, and it's very important. Effi, you've raised this point that there wasn't, and Yossi writes about it too, and so do other security officials, that there was no intelligence, cultural teamwork about the Palestinians. What did they think? I'm not talking about that, I'm saying just a fact. There was none. It's even worse, someone's saying, but if he doesn't speak into a microphone, unfortunately I cannot interpret. If you could please hand him a microphone. Professor Mordechai Kedar, Dr. Harold Rold, and Khaled Abu Tuam are experts on the Palestinian side, and I think it's very important. Perhaps, Harold, could you give us 2 minutes as an expert on Islam about what was going on through Arafat's head and what he said, his declarations, because that has to be part of the considerations of Israel in what's happening, and that's why I also want to call Dr. Dave Wormser, who's from the United States, and he also followed the Palestinian side. Harold, can you please give us 2 minutes of what you understand as an expert on Islam in the Arab world? It works, yes, it's working. Okay. Please speak into the microphone, Harold, otherwise they won't hear you. 1, 2, 3, 4. During Oslo, from the late 1980s to the early 1990s, I was working at the Pentagon in the United States. I'm not Israeli. And I was walking around. My area of expertise is how do the other side, how do the Muslims understand what's their attitude towards this place, towards the state of Israel and the Jews. And I want to say, first of all, I walked around, I know Arabic too, and I would walk around Washington among the Arabs, and they would say, the Israelis are writing our papers, our positions, our views. They laughed at them, and they said, among themselves, if the Israelis want to commit suicide, fine, we'll help them do that. That's what the atmosphere was like in Oslo. Arafat, after signing, 2 weeks after signing, he was in South Africa. And he was recorded giving a sermon in some mosque, saying, guys, I did not sign any peace agreement. I signed an agreement which is like a Hudaybiyah. It is the place where the Muslim Prophet Muhammad said he signed when he was weak. He spoke, he signed with his enemies an agreement for 10 years. It's like a ceasefire, kind of hudna, if you will. And what did he say? It's for 10 years, but he understood it in 2 years that he was stronger than them, so he attacked them and he succeeded, and that's it. So Arafat actually mentioned this battle. He said, I signed the Oslo Agreement just as the Prophet did. It's the salami method. Slowly but surely. Moreover, Arafat never used the English word peace. In Arabic, we don't have this word as we do in English. peace is the objective. The word salam has nothing to do with this concept of peace. They also know what sabr is. Sabr is to mimic, is to wait. Slowly but surely, we'll wait. We'll do it. The Israelis are so stupid that if they want to help us to kill them, to get rid of them, then we'll do that lovingly. And I just want to quote Bernard Lewis, the one and only, what he said about this entire period of time. He summed it up like so. He said, if the aim here of the negotiations, if we're talking about borders, there's something to talk about. But if we're talking about the right to exist, there's no point in discussing it, because the Arabs were talking amongst themselves about simply, that's it, it's temporary, and we'll do what needs to be done in order to proceed forward with our aim. And it's what you said, from the sea to the river. It's a nice rhyme in Arabic. And they still think the same way. They have never changed their opinion. That does not mean that among them are not people who think so. But the moment they open their mouths, they are in danger of being killed by others. Thank you. Thank you, Harold, and I know we have to stop. אני הבטחתי לך שתוכל להגיד.
2 minutes, I know, אני בסכנת קיומית, אני יודע את זה. חאלד אבו תואם, יוני בן מנחם ואחרים, ופרופסור קידר, גם מומחים מובחרים כפי שידעו לנו בענייני אסלאם, עולם ערבי
the Arab world and the Middle East, and we'll hear from them later on as well. It is very important today for us to understand the political culture and the psychological aspect and ideological aspect of the other side, which has not been done over the last 30 years. It's very important to understand them, not only to speak by ourselves, about ourselves, and our responsibility from our angle. So, Professor Hirschfeld, your response. I have two short responses. First of all, about subversiveness.
שהוא עומד להגיע להסכם של ממשל עצמי בתוך 8 או 10 חודשים. אז קודם כל זה לא היה חתם. עכשיו הבעיה.
That was not subversive, and the main issue was that there was no other option except to negotiate with the PLO, and that was because of the Likud, what they did. The problem with the PLO was recognizing the PLO. To start with them, to start talking to them, that would immediately legitimize them. So we had to find out what we can do without committing. It's true. When I say whatever I say does not bind anyone, and we just need to look and to examine this. And I also told Abu Allah a joke, and I said, after I'm no longer part of the negotiating team, the story would have been different. And Rabin gave me the approval to do these talks. And after the second time, when there was something to talk about, we told them exactly what was happening, and Rabin approved it. Now Rabin and the journalists don't really understand that, but Rabin in May 1993 gave an interview to Ha'olam Hazeh, and he said that he had to speak to the PLO. Now, subversiveness, I'll tell you from my perspective, you said something very true. You said that the struggle is between us, is among the Jews, and it's very serious. It's ideological, but it's ideological existential. The right wing, the religious right wing, did not accept that there is true secular Judaism, true Zionism, and you've completely deleted us, wiped us, persecuted us, and that is unforgivable. And if they will not, and I will ask you a question too, and that's why the question is, does the settlers' activity not subversive? Of course it's subversive. So okay, so the battle is among us. And I have a question for you. I said that at the beginning. The Palestinians are just bystanders here. That's why the consultation is so important, and perhaps we will reach a common denominator, because the Abraham Accords creates options, and I think that from a position of power you can do a lot of good. I'm sorry, if you could have a microphone, I cannot interpret him. The answer is that I said before that we need the Abraham Accords. First of all, we agree on the most important thing. The discussion on Oslo is a discussion among us about the meaning of Israel, about the way that we and how we are able to work. I'm sorry, his microphone is not working. I think that your subversiveness, which you found crucial, led to outcomes that you now need to be accountable for. Well, I think the exact opposite. We're similar. I'm saying the same accusation at you. Can I ask you one question? Of course. Please, I hope you give me a good answer. I want to go to Kiryat Arba with you, and I will defend Kiryat Arba in any agreement with the Palestinians. But when you come out of Kiryat Arba, you will see on the right-hand side a monument for Baruch Goldstein. If you can come with me, and if we together can destroy this monument, because it goes against everything in Judaism, then I will cooperate with you. I think that it's like asking me if Yigal Amir is a killer. He is a despicable killer. He's heinous, and it's not an obstacle to peace. They are the only ones who have done something that is not done, things that cannot be done, not morally, not from a Jewish perspective, not from a human perspective, or politically. And that's why it's esoteric. It's not relevant. If you will agree that Kiryat Arba and Hebron are the rocks of our nation, are something that we have that is very important to us, and they should remain in the hands of Israel forever, that will be amazing. Thank you both very much. Thank you. We're now going into family therapy, so I think we should move on. First of all, thank you very much for your patience. We will have discussions here, I promise. We just did not adhere to the schedule, but we're certainly very aware of that. We would like to have more discussions, and we will get there. Oh, the floor is yours. Just some housekeeping. The hotel is asking the person whose car is